Hi, I'm Mike, and welcome to embee Go. This is my 2016 Triumph Tiger 800. Today, we're going to talk about replacing the factory crash bars with a set of Givi TN6409 crash bars. We're going to start by talking about why I wanted to replace the factory crash bars. Then we're going to talk a little bit about why I chose Givi over several of the other options. We'll go into what you're going to need to do this installation. We'll talk about how to remove the old bars, how to install the new bars, and then I'll tell you what I think. So first off, why would you want to replace your factory crash bars? Well, these are the factory crash bars, and as you can see, they are lowers only. That creates a problem. While they do protect the engine case if you go down, they do not protect the fairings. These fairings stick out pretty far, and they're fairly expensive to replace if you were to go down and crack these. Did a little searching online, and the uppers and lowers are about $190 each. And of course, you'd probably also want to replace the sticker. If you were to go down and crack both of these, you'd be in for about $400 per side to repair the damage that was done by going down without any protection. The second reason that you'd want to replace the factory crash bars is the way that they mount. The factory crash bars mount to the engine block itself rather than to the frame. It seems like a poor design to me. I understand why they did it, because if they're just going to protect the lower part of the bike, there really wasn't anything else to connect to. But I thought that was a risk and thought it was a fairly poor design, so I wanted to replace it with something that mounts to the frame rather than the engine block. And all of the aftermarket crash bars I found do mount to the frame. So why did I choose the Givis over several of the other brands? The biggest reason was price. I know that there are probably better, more stout options out there, and if you are traveling across Mongolia, going to go down several times, then having the very best might make sense. I'm a fairly light off-roader, just wanted some basic protection, and I think the Givis fit the bill for that nicely. A few of the other options I looked at. First off, SW Motec. Those were probably the closest options to the Givis. They come as a one-piece unit. They do protect the top and the bottom. I was able to locate them online for about $325. The next option I looked at was Heed. Heed's a European brand. When I was shopping for this bike, one of the bikes I looked at had a set of Heed crash bars on it. They looked great. They even came with a really cool bag that was custom fit to fit in here. The Heeds come in two options. There are uppers only, and there are full crash bars similar to these. The uppers are about $207 plus $112 shipping for a total of about $325. The downside to that is that you still have the problem where the lower crash bars are mounted to the frame. And again, I wanted to avoid that. So the full crash bars are about $240, and shipping for those is about $133 for a total of about $373. That solution looked really great, but it was a little bit more expensive. The last set I looked at was Hepco and Becker. Hepco and Beckers come as an upper and a lower. Each side, the upper and the lower, are each about $345. So to solve both of the problems I wanted to solve, I'd be in for just a little bit less than $700. I was able to find the Givis very frequently for between $210 and $225 online. I finally found an open box set for about $175, and once I saw that, I went ahead and pulled the trigger. Next, we're going to talk about what you're going to need to do this installation. The good news is you don't need any special tools. Most people will have everything they need in their toolkit to perform this installation. You're going to need some sockets and open-end wrenches, or spanners as our friends from across the pond call them. You'll need an 8 mil, a 10 mil, 12 mil, 14 mil, 17 mil. You're also going to need some extensions because there are a few bolts that are a little harder to get at, so the extensions will help you get at those. You're going to need a torque wrench. You can probably get away without it. You're going to be removing motor mounts where the motor mounts to the frame. You're going to need some Allen wrenches, specifically a 5 millimeter. but I think I also needed a 4mm and a 6mm for a couple of the panels that you need to remove. You're going to need a set of Torx drivers. There are a couple of Torx head bolts that need to come out. You're going to need a pair of pliers, both regular and needle nose. Really, you're just going to need those. There's a couple of springs you're going to need to reinstall, and that goes a lot easier with a set of needle nose pliers. You're going to need a breaker bar. Motor mounts, they're on there pretty tight, and the breaker bar will make that a lot easier. You're going to need an interior clip remover. You can get away without it, but to remove the fairings, there are a couple of plastic clips that are a lot easier to remove if you have an interior clip remover. The last thing you're going to need is a helper. There's going to be a few times where you're going to be working on one side of the bike and you're going to need somebody to hold a wrench on the other side of the bike. Having a helper makes that a lot easier. So before you start, there's a few things to think about. Number one, the instructions that come with the bars are absolutely terrible. They are sparse. They are primarily in Italian, and there's some references to English in here, but they're not easy to read. They're also incorrect. They show a couple of parts that aren't the actual parts that you got. That caused some problems for me in the installation, and I'm hoping that this video will help you avoid those problems. The next thing to think about, you want to do both sides at the same time. And what I mean by that, when I did this installation, I started on the left side, removed everything, installed everything, and then went to the right side and did the same thing. It would have been a lot easier if I had removed everything I needed to remove, started on the right side, and then moved to the left side, and then put the panels and such back on. I'll explain that a little bit more as I talk about the installation, but I would avoid trying to do one side and then the other. So let's talk about what you're going to need to remove in order to do this project. First thing you're going to need to remove are the old bars. They come off fairly easily. There are 4 bolts that hold the bars on, 3 to the engine block, and then 1 that holds the crossbar in the front. When you remove the old bolts, all you have to do is put the old bolts back in the holes. That'll keep mud and such from getting in there. You're not going to need the old mounting points. You just want to plug the holes. The next thing you're going to need to remove are the fairings. Fairings come off pretty easy. There are 3 bolts underneath. There's also a plastic screw. There's also a wire, of course, for the turn signals that you'll need to disconnect. The next thing you're going to need to remove is the rear brake pedal. It comes off pretty easy. There's really just the 1 bolt holding it on with, I believe that's an Allen bolt in there. You can pull that off and just kind of set it aside. There is a spring back there that you're going to need to put back on. It's a little tricky to get back in, but just pay attention to what you're doing when you take it off, and it should go on pretty easily. The last thing you're going to need to remove on the left side of the bike is the shifter and linkage. There's a small plastic panel that'll come off. You'll remove the shifter and linkage with an 8mm bolt you'll pull out, and you can get the shifter and linkage out of the way. Now let's talk about installing the Givi bars. Givi bars bolt onto the frame rather than the engine case in 4 places. There's 1 here, 1 here, 1 here. This actually does mount to the engine block. And then finally, there's a crossbar similar to the factory bars. When installing these are actually motor mounts. These 2 here are actually motor mounts. So I found it best to ensure that I got those torqued back to factory spec. Fortunately, the previous owner gave me a copy of the shop manual, which indicates that these spec to 48 Newton meters, which translates to 35.4 foot-pounds of torque. That's where you're going to need your torque wrench, so I wanted to make sure that I had those torqued to spec. Now, one thing to note here, and this was the part that was very difficult for me and very difficult in the instructions. The bottom mount of both of the bars mounts to a bolt that goes all the way through the engine. These other mounts just come out of the side that they're on, but the bottom one goes all the way through. You don't have to pull that bolt out. For the right side crash bar, you do need to back it out, and then the crash bar will slide in to that bolt. On the other side, that bolt actually threads into the crash bar. And then once you tighten this side, you will actually be tightening both sides, because that bolt will be pulling against the crash bar and pulling itself in. The right side installs very similarly. Again, there's a frame mount, an engine motor mount here. By the way, this mount here is pretty difficult to get at. This is where I really needed a helper and extensions. This one sits way up in there. There's a little adapter that they give you to bring this up to the engine block. It's tough to get at. I ended up having to actually tape my bolt to my socket and get it in there and hold it in place. Because I didn't have a helper, I ended up zip tying my wrench to one side and then bolting it from the other side. It was not easy, but I got it done. And like I said, that's a place where a helper would be really nice to have. So the last thing you'll install are these little plastic strap holders. They just install with 4 screws. These are actually kind of cool. Not all of the brands I looked at had them. They do give it a little branding, and they do give you something if you want to strap something to your tank. I suppose there may even be bags that you can get that would mount to this, but they are a nice little flourish. Once you have the crash bars on and tightened, you'll just reinstall the rear brake pedal. It goes on just like it came off. There is a spring back there. Again, that spring's a little tricky to get in place, but once you get it in place, you just bolt the brake pedal back in. On the other side, you'll reinstall the shifter and linkage, and then you'll reinstall the fairings. They go on the opposite way they came off. They are a little trickier to put on now that you have these bars, but the bars do actually fit very well. There's plenty of space in here to maneuver the fairings in place without scratching anything. This job took me about 5 hours. It would have probably taken me a lot less had I known some of the things that I just shared with you. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd say this job was about a 5. Pretty tedious. You do have to manhandle the bars a little bit to get at some of the bolts. I will say it was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. I thought I'm just going to remove 4 bolts, pop these on, no big deal. But it was quite a bit harder. It took me a lot longer than I wanted it to. I was trying to film that while I did that. That probably added a little bit of time as well. But now that I have them on, I've got to say I'm really happy with them. I think they look great. I do feel a lot more comfortable about going off-road, and if I do happen to tip, I'm not going to damage these, or I'm much less likely to damage these. I'm also not as likely to damage the engine block if I go down fairly hard or against a rock. So I hope this video helped you. I hope that if you choose to install Givi Crash Bars on your Triumph Tiger, that maybe saves you some time. If you have any thoughts or any suggestions, please leave them in the comments below. And if you like this video, give it a subscribe.